Join me today as we talk about X-Men 97, Episode 7. This is the Geek Cabal channel. My name is Bob, and today we're going to be talking about Episode 7 of the Disney Plus series X-Men 97, which, as of this recording, just came out earlier today. So, it's hard to talk much about this episode without going into spoilers, so I'll try to non-spoilery as much as I can here. This episode has some closure of sorts on some issues. People are kind of accepting what happened back in episode 5 or not accepting, as the case may be. And some of the predictions that I had appear like they're going to come to pass. And I'll explain which ones in the spoiler section, but I want to be clear. One of the two is not one that I had uniquely to myself. Several other people drew the same conclusion based on evidence in the show itself. And so I'm not sitting here saying I'm Nostradamus or anything. The second one, I haven't actually heard anyone bring up yet. And it looks like that one's also going to come to pass. So we'll see how exactly. I could still be off on the details, but the rough sketches do appear like it's going to happen. Totally going to claim Nostradamus mode on that one, though. So, yeah. So here's what we got. We have a funeral for a fallen character from episode 5. There's a notable absence at said funeral. We get a couple cameos. We get it appears like Nightcrawler is probably on the team now, although he also showed up to give the eulogy at the funeral because he is Catholic and I believe he's an ordained priest, or at least he is in the comics. I don't remember how much it actually explored in the original series on that front. He does mention the fact that that Rogue is his adopted sister, because Mystique did raise her, and Mystique is his mother, his biological mother. In the cartoon, I guess technically speaking, in the comics, Mystique is his biological father. I still haven't read that issue, so I don't know. But anyway, so it looks like he's kind of on board, which has raised some speculation I've seen. I didn't watch the video, but I knew where they were going with it from the title. Since we have Nightcrawler, we have Storm in her original costume from whenever she was introduced back in Giant Size X-Men #1, and we have Wolverine. All three of them originally are from that issue. Colossus is already a known entity in the cartoon, so it may only be a matter of time before he's on board to kind of have the Giant Size X-Men team, which would also need Thunderbird. I don't know his status in the cartoon, so we'll see. But could be interesting. So let's see. We get a little bit of Gyrick, Boulevard Trask, a little bit of Mr. Sinister, and God, there's another cameo, and I can't think of who it is now. I'm totally spacing it. Oh, Thunderbolt Ross is in this. So we are in the larger Marvel continuity for sure. Or at least the X-Men universe definitely has other people in it. Like the 97 series, I'm going to do a separate, probably much shorter video on this here. It'll probably come out here real shortly. The X-Men and Spider-Man, the 90s animated series, are the same continuity because there's some crossover with them in their episodes. Now, also, I'm assuming the 90s Fantastic Four and Iron Man series are also in the same continuity. because Iron Man and War Machine both show up in the Spider-Man series, and I could have sworn some subset of the Fantastic Four show up in the final episodes of Spider-Man. Well, the second to last uh, big group of episodes that cover the Secret Wars, because I know Doctor Doom is in there as a villain. I believe one of the Fantastic Four is there on the team, but it's been a while since I've seen those episodes. And Captain America is there, but he was also previously in the show. So, don't know about the other Avengers, and so I don't know how Captain America, assuming that's all one continuity, which it appears to be, or is likely, then that means that Captain America somehow got out of the situation he was stuck in, where he and the Red Skull were locked in a like another alternate dimension, like perpetual energy kind of thing. Um, yeah, so somehow they got out of that, and if he's out, then presumably so is the Red Skull. But I suppose we'll see. So so Captain America's in the episode. Not for long, but I mean, Rogue recognizes him, so clearly they know each other. Um, yeah, so that's probably about as far as I can go without going into spoilers. Like I said, this episode. Actually, I don't remember if I said this. I really should write scripts down for these things. Um, this episode could feel like filler material, although some very important things do happen. I don't think it's filler. It's definitely advancing the plot. It leaves some unanswered questions, that's for sure. But if you know from the comics, then you know the answers to some of the questions that are in the show. And that's one thing I definitely want to commend the show for, is that the fact that myself and several others were able to be like, yeah, it's probably going here, but with there still being a question about it, and kind of mishmashing other storylines, so you don't really know for sure. That's to me, that's effective foreshadowing, because you don't want it to be, well, obviously it's got to be this, you know, but you want it so there's still that question up until the near the reveal, where there's some other critical piece falls into place, like, well, now it's kind of got to be, and that's where we are at the end of this episode. So, spoilers for those who are concerned with these things. Okay, so the funeral they're going to is Gambit's funeral, because he died back in the 5th episode. And this hammers home the point that, yes, he's dead. So, and Nightcrawler delivers the eulogy. Rogue is suspiciously absent from the funeral. And they can't figure it out. Wolverine's the one that has, Jubilee's really broken up about all this, and especially the fact Gambit's not there. And so Wolverine tries to tell her that, look, grief is a very personal thing, and people have to deal with it in their own way. And so they can't criticize Rogue for not showing up. Also, she's probably dealing with it in a very destructive way, which we cut to, and she is, because she's trying to find Gyrick, because he knows where to find Trask. Because Sentinels, so Trask. So she goes to try to find Gyrick at, I guess, is the Hulkbuster base, because General Ross is there, and he's like, oh, don't worry, boys, like, this base is built to hold the Hulk, and then Rogue bashes in through the ceiling. He's like, so, you need to tell me where Gyrick is. And she tracks him to this cabin in the wilderness, in the middle of nowhere, and Captain America's there, and he's like, hold on, Rogue, like, we gotta do this the right way. And she's like, I ain't got time for your right way. And he tries to tell her that he's been moved by people that are like super duper black ops types, and that's why he's concerned, but he's been moved to Mexico. So Captain America can't exactly go storming in there, because he's Captain America. Rogue's like, well, sorry, if you were a friend of mutants, like, you'd help us. He's like, well, we gotta do this by the book. She's like, well, I don't think so. By the way, go fetch your shield, and just like hurtles it off into the distance. And so kind of leaves him with a scowl on his face, kind of mode. And yeah. So she goes off to the Mexican consulate, and She gets there and she beats up some guys outside and gets into Gyrick. And back at the cabin, there was clear there was some kind of operation there, and no pun intended for what I'm about to say. Uh, all the Some of the computers still had the letters OZT on them, which, if you were a fan of the X-Men back in the 90s and you've pieced together what's going to happen here, you know that stands for Operation Zero Tolerance. Which, now that I've said that, if you're a fan of the 90s X-Men and haven't seen this episode, you probably also know who the villain is. But I'll get to that in a moment. So, and I'll explain Operation Zero Tolerance here in a second. So she goes to the consulate, she finds Gyrick, and Gyrick's all like, oh, haha, Jean's abilities to telepath her way into my mind aren't going to work this time. And she's just like, yeah, it's going to be a little bit different. Takes her gloves off and grabs him because she can absorb people's memories that way. And kind of throws her for a loop. The X-Men find her like awake in an alleyway. Now, the X-Men went to Genosha to try to help where they could. Scott is desperately trying to find Madeline Pryor because no one's gone into the ruins of the main big kind of citadel thing. Oh, and before this, he talked to the president, who I'm pretty sure is the president now, which I believe was supposed to be Robert Kelly, who did a turnaround as far as his views on mutants, and tries to tell Scott, like, I can't give you tons of overt help right now because of how politically charged the issue is. And Scott doesn't want to hear that, and Kelly's trying to tell him, look, if I do this and it backfires and I'm not reelected, someone who's very anti-mutant is likely going to be the winner, and that will be the worst overall situation. And Kelly's being pragmatic about this. But Scott is, people's lives are potentially on the line in the ruins, trying to dig people out that might still be alive. So I understand Scott's position as well. It's hard whenever you're on the receiving end of pragmatism, even though it might be the better overall approach. It sucks to be on the receiving end of it. So, like I said, so they go to Genosha. They try to help. Jean detects a psychic signature of some kind in the ruins. And Scott is hoping beyond hope it's Madeline Pryor, but it is in fact Emma Frost, who is in her diamond form. And I think it's Beast that notes that she's never displayed those kind of powers before. And he questions if it's some kind of secondary mutation or something, which from the comics, we know that yes, it is in fact a secondary mutation. Emma, being Emma, has quite the quip about it, even though she's probably near death. She's like, I've always been good under pressure, because, diamond. But, yeah. So they try to help. Jubilee convinces Sunspot to tell his mother that he's a mutant. And they go and talk to her. And she's like, well, yeah, I kind of figured it out after 4 of our houses burned down that you were probably a mutant and your powers are probably somewhat fire-based. And she's like, and she thanks Jubilee for helping him come around to telling them. And she's like, however, now we have to keep this all a big secret because the shareholders don't want to hear anything at all about mutants. So we got to do that, and we got to kind of control who you hang out with. And she kind of gives a real pointed look to Jubilee, because Jubilee's publicly known to be an X-Man. So that's kind of where that comes in, and it's one of those. It's kind of a variation of the scene in X-Men 2. In X-Men 2, you had that moment where Iceman's parents were like, "Have you tried not being a mutant?" Here it's like, okay, yeah, we accept that you're a mutant. That's fine. We're not going to disown you or anything, but you can't tell anybody. It's one of those, like, again, it's kind of in parallel with what I'm sure plenty of people in the LGBTQ community have faced. Although I think they probably get more of that first one, followed by potential disownment. And I think the second one is probably less, but I'm sure it happens of the like, look, you're a kid. We're not going to disown you or anything. We're not upset or anything, but you got to keep it on the down low so you don't disgrace the family. And so it definitely comes off as a scene like that. So I don't know a ton about Sunspot's backstory because I haven't read through the New Mutants yet, the Claremont era and on. So I only know him from a little bit from later comics, where obviously he's very open about everything. So I don't know how accurate this is in the comics. Can't really comment on that. Um, yeah, then the X-Men realize they get a message from Boulevard Trask, and he says that Sinister's behind everything, that he did not try to attack Genosha. And it's kind of odd because they're in a little bit later conversation that they have with him. Oh, the X Men show up where he is at a UN building, and the guards have all been knocked out, and they have the OZT on their things, and they don't know what that means yet. So they go up about halfway up the building, I don't know, probably like 40 stories up or something, and they're talking to Boulevard Trask, and he's really coming across like that he didn't intend on like genociding the mutants, which is kind of odd because I always kind of got the impression that was his plan with the Sentinels. So it sounds like he really has convinced himself that the Sentinels were only ever going to be like a defensive measure or to keep mutants under control and not actually kill them. So it does lead to an interesting, was that actually his intent, at least in the cartoon anyway? Not that it really, not that it really matters. You build giant death bots, and especially if you build a second and then a third master mold, and presumably a fourth one here somewhere. After the one went crazy and was like, "Oh no, you're all humans. I'm just gonna, rule over all of you and put computers into politicians' brains and control the world." Like you would think after that happened once, you'd be like, maybe the giant death bots aren't the best approach here. So um, he is going to kill himself because of what's happened. Because he's like they've made me into a monster. And again, I'm really thinking now that like maybe that wasn't his intent. Which again, it's interesting from a character study standpoint, but you know, still probably a monster. So he is going to throw himself off the building. Rogue grabs him as he's falling, and he's like, "I don't know. I don't remember." Oh, they're trying to find Sinister now, I think. And he's like, "Well, I don't know. I've got nothing for you." And Rogue's like, "Well, I don't either," and lets him fall to his death. It turns around, the X-Men are like, "What the hell did you do?" And she's like, "He was a monster. He built the Sentinels. He killed both of my boyfriends. Like, screw him." And I'm kind of like, well, on the one hand, totally understandable. On the other hand, like, you're proving them right. Like, it sucks, but optics do matter. However, Trask then comes back up, and it's obvious. Oh, as they came in to the building he's in, there's a bunch of like cybernetic stuff in the room he's in, and Beast is looking at it and is like, this stuff is way more advanced than anything else on the planet. Like, where did any of this come from? A better question is probably when. So the Trask comes back, and Trask is a Prime Sentinel now. Now, from the comics, the Prime Sentinels are people that have had nanites injected into them that lay dormant until they get activated. Then they're turned into a cybernetic human-sized Sentinel, which has the ability to counteract mutant powers and a bunch of other things. And basically, they're sleeper agents until it gets triggered. That's part of Operation Zero Tolerance. So he just wipes the floor with the X-Men. And then like an electromagnetic pulse grenade goes off next to him, and you see Cable, and he's like, whatever kind of grenade it was, like, that's the quickest way to take these things down. He's like, we got to move now, or there won't be a future left to save. And that's when her Jean, like, her powers kind of go into his mind, and she sees the moment with Madeline, and she's like, oh no, oh my god, like, you're Christopher. And he's like, no time to get gushy on the reunion. And sees Cyclops like, look, Dad, we got to do something. And yeah, so the reunion is quite rushed. Cable being his usual gruff, no nonsense self. And then it cuts to Mr. Sinister, and well, you've already seen the real villain, because he goes and visits Gyrick after Rogue and then kills him. And the strange thing happened. He came into the room and like the radio changed to a different station, like the song "One-Eyed, One-Horn, Flying Purple People Eater" came on, and then it goes back to the other channel whenever he leaves, and then you see him with Mr. Sinister, and it's Bastion. So he's the big bad. It is Bastion, and he basically tells Sinister, like, you guys have been, you and all the other villains have been trying since '92 to kill these people, and you failed. And Sinister's like, well, unless I'm mistaken, you're also one of those failures. And he's like, I was, but then I did something you people can't do or won't do or whatever. And he's like, I evolved, which is true, because Bastion is a fusion of Nimrod and Master Mold, then sent through a magical gateway to Siege Perilous, which turned the fusion into Bastion, who looks like a man, who initially thought he was a man, and then figured out that he's actually a machine. And he's the one who's in charge of Operation Zero Tolerance, who created the Prime Sentinels and all this stuff. So that's what they're up against. And I don't know what his deal with Sinister is. That could be anything. I know Miss Sinister teamed up with Bastion in a comic shortly before the Krakoan era, where the some Sentinels showed up to the X Mansion or wherever the X-Men were. It's been also read the series, and they were there to protect the X-Men and to bring them somewhere. And the X-Men kind of were like, oh, this seems really sketchy, but let's go along with it. And they get there, and it's Miss Sinister and Bastion and some others. Well, Miss Sinister comes from the Ultimates universe, and in the Ultimates universe, they had a virus or something that could turn people into mutants. And so they take it from Wolverine's son from the Ultimates universe, I believe. It'd be James Howlett, I think. I'm probably screwing up the details in this. I apologize if I am. And they're going to release it to create more mutants. And they're like, well, wait a minute. Your job is to destroy all the mutants. Talking to Bastion, like, why would you do this? And he's like, well, it is. And he's like, and Beast had already been kind of talking about this beforehand. Like, what happens to a machine, a self-aware machine, once it fulfills its primary programming? Does it shut down? Does it just keep existing? Does it finally have free will? What does it do? Well, if Bastion's job is to kill all the mutants, what happens when he actually succeeds? And I'm guessing he doesn't know that either. So to his mind, that means he just needs more mutants to kill, because mutant population has been decimated. And so the X-Men are like, so wait, you're just doing this to create more mutants to kill? And he's like, yeah. Then he's like, no, I'm not going to kill you guys. We're cool. He's like, maybe your grandchildren, but we're fine. We're good. And they're just like, this is insane. And so then they start attacking, and the Sentinels won't fight back because they're programmed not to harm mutants, and so they just destroy them. It's an interesting story, an interesting concept, you know. So, no idea if that plays into at all with Sinister here or anything, but we'll see. This is probably like one of Sinister's many other gambits where he hopes to gain control of a bunch of genetic material. Because he did that in one storyline where he teamed up with the High Evolutionary and double-crossed him, and yeah. So, yeah, I don't know where that's going, but the other thing I speculated on, where I mentioned that Xavier's coming back to Earth, and since they told everyone he's dead, that's going to kind of blow up in their face whenever he shows up. Well, Bastion received the transmission of the wedding, so he knows that Xavier's still alive, and he's like, oh, the mutant's been keeping secrets from people. Like, well, I wonder how the world's going to react to that. And then finally you see that Magneto is still alive, or who appears to be Magneto. Since we're going on the 90s here, I think is a very, 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 very slim chance it's his clone Joseph, but it's probably just Magneto. We'll see, though. So yeah, that's most of what happened in the episode. And yeah, so it is Bastion. So we're looking at Operation Zero Tolerance. Probably gonna look at a bunch of humanoid sentinels. That'll probably play into it too. There'll probably be plenty of footage of the X-Men just blasting people, and they're not going to be able to tell that they're human, that they're sentinelified, or that they will. Then they'll die and revert to human form, and so it'll end with everyone pretty well pissed off at the X-Men, pissed off about lying about Xavier. Probably even find out that they're pissed off that Magneto's not dead either, and also they can't find Valerie Cooper, so she might be dead, and that'll look bad too. So yeah, it's not looking particularly great for the X Men. Bastion is one hell of a threat because Nimrod's from the future, so he has knowledge of future events, which is always dangerous. Plus the fact that you know Nimrod's one hell of a thing to try to fight. So yeah, and if he has control of more Sentinels, because presumably he was the one who actually ordered the attack on Genosha, just using Sinister as the proxy for whatever reason. And I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to guess what Sinister's angle is here, or why Bastion is willing to work with him. So, you know, but yeah, that's about where everything stands. I think, yeah, I think that's where we're going here for the finale. It's episode 7. So I've heard previously that the last 3 episodes collectively are the finale. We'll see next week, I guess. Still no sign of apocalypse anywhere, aside from the opening part, but that's probably just to have the cable part. We'll see, though. He could pop back up. I don't know what the context would potentially be at this point, but he's kind of the odd man out so far in like classic villains. We haven't seen him. We haven't seen Sabretooth. Haven't seen Mystique and the Brotherhood in action. We saw him in the flashback, but so there's a lot to happen here potentially. So we'll see how it all goes. Let me know down in the comments if you're watching the show what you think so far. Like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. But otherwise, welcome to the X-Men. Hope you survive the experience.